Welcome to the S.O.A.P Bible Study Series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We are starting a brand new book for this this series, this set, right? We're going to be a while in this book. It's a long one.
It is.
It's a long one. It is the very first one of the Bible.
Yes.
If you notice my page, I'm all the way at the beginning here.
Oh yeah, you gave it away, didn't you? No. Nice, nice. So Genesis means in the beginning, right? Which is a fitting words.
Yeah, both in Hebrew and Greek. Interestingly, the
Hebrew
title and the Greek title both mean beginning.
Nice.
So,
like you said, it's long, about 50 chapters, so we're going to be there for a while.
Yeah.
I think you have us in a chapter a day, but then later on the chapters are longer. So
yeah, we'll split up a few.
He does make it nice for you.
Yeah, I try to make it a little bit easier for reading. But yeah, because there's so much narrative here, you try to keep the narrative together. You don't want to split it up too much, right? So a chapter a day or something like that helps keep the flow.
Right. So history tells us this was written by Moses, more than likely when he was in the wilderness, and he had time, so he could write it. But Genesis covers an amazing number of years, about 2,400 years in these 50 chapters. Yeah. And we'll see the first 11 cover about 2,000 years.
About 2,000 years for the first 11 chapters.
So what we need to understand is we're going to be missing some details,
just a little bit,
right? But we have enough.
Yeah.
And God made sure we had enough, but we don't have all in there. So.
Yeah. So what's interesting is the first 11 chapters are foundational to not just the book of Genesis, but the whole Bible.
Right.
Okay. With the exception of the church, all the other 10 major doctrines are addressed in some way in the first 11 chapters, and we will take them very literally. Okay, right. And if you just write off the first 11 chapters, you might as well write off the whole book. And they're really that important. Yeah.
So we're going to cover the creation. We're going to cover Adam and Eve. We're going to cover Noah. We're going to cover Abraham. A lot of Abraham. Yeah. And then we're going to continue down his lineage with Abraham and look at his son, his grandson, and his great-grandson. Yep. And we finally end up with the great-grandson who is in Egypt. Yep. And we actually end with the nation of Israel, that small nation of probably 25 to 50 people.
It's a family. It's a family, not a nation. It's a family at that point, right? Yeah.
In Egypt. If I back up a little bit, when I first came to Oak Tree, I came to, you hosted a Bible study. I'm sure it was on a Saturday morning. It was a part of a men's group type of thing. And it was about Genesis. So I dutifully read, Genesis chapter 1, all the verses in there. And I had read it before, and I'm sure I didn't study it very well. But I was amazed at how much I didn't question. I'm sure that this is an overstatement, but I think that first Bible study, we covered Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 in the hour. Maybe an overstatement.
There's a lot of stuff in those 10 words.
Yeah. Well, and the difference was the number of questions. Well, for example, the first 3 words, right? In the beginning. It's pretty obvious. Mm-hmm. We're in the beginning. How could we possibly question that? Yeah. 50 questions later, right? But you really opened the eyes, right? Yeah. And okay, in the beginning. Well, wait. What happened before the beginning? Yeah. And who was there? If God is eternal, there's no beginning, so this isn't about God. Right. What beginning are we at? Yep. Where are we at? And it was really eye-opening to me, and which is cool. And the reason that is important is Christianity is becoming less and less, and it's up to every one of us to be able to ask these kinds of questions, because these are the kind of questions we should be able to answer. Especially with Genesis. If somebody just picks up a book, you start at the beginning. Yeah. Most people are going to start in Genesis, and they're going to have questions.
Yeah, and with every just a couple of generations ago, you said Christianity is becoming less and less. Just a couple of generations ago, most people were familiar with the Bible, at least at some level. Maybe went to Sunday school or something. Today, a lot of people have never heard of these things before, right? So yeah, it really is brand new. Yeah. So there are a lot of people watching that you're like, I've read Genesis, I've read all this stuff. This is easy.
This is basic.
So what we're going to try to do is
stump the chump.
Yeah, sort of point out maybe some things that you can read this. Fine, you can read this. We want you to read it, but maybe there's some things that we can point out that are maybe a little bit overlooked, or you miss, or something like that, right?
So I'm gonna do my best, and it's gonna be very difficult for me not to cover everything, but that's intentional, just so we can talk longer about these things that people may miss. All right, so chapter 1, God explains what He did the first 6 days,
Yeah.
and these are the creation verses. So in day 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is the base that we started with in
Yeah.
here. Now, is this day 1
Yeah, I think verse 1 is a summary statement. In fact, I think verse 1 and 2 is a summary statement.
of all 6 days?
Just this is the starting point. There's some debate, was verse 1 and 2 a long time ago, and then we got to this, is a short time, and then we got to the rest of the creation. It's a summary statement. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This is how He did it. Right? So,
Right. So I love verse 2. The Spirit of God moved over the surface of the water.
Yep.
I mean,
yeah.
just Him. So it was created, it was there, and the Spirit of God went out to check on it.
Yeah.
It's something that easy, but now we have God in 2 forms, in 2 verses.
Yeah.
And it's like, how many more are we going to
Well,
have
and
here?
again, if you've never read this before, you're only on verse 2. You're like, okay, I don't even know what's going on at this point. Obviously we get, later, God doesn't have form, all this other stuff, right? But if you're just reading it for the first time,
Right.
Really cool points, since we're bringing out cool points. The word translated, the Spirit was hovering or moving over. It's the same Hebrew word that describes how a hen works with her chicks. Spreads out her wings,
hovering.
keeps them
Nice.
warm. So there's a life-giving thing going on here.
Right.
So,
Right.
and that's what the Holy Spirit does, is He gives life. So
Yep.
we see that literally in verse 2 on the first page.
Yeah. Earth was without shape, empty, darkness,
Yeah.
and then God says, let there be light.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we've got 6 days, and
Yep.
if a lot of people have noticed this, this isn't original with us, but the first 3 days, because it says it was without form and it was empty. So what does God do? The first 3 days He forms it. The next 3 days He fills it.
Nice.
So it's no longer without form and empty.
Yeah.
Now it's formed and filled. So it just sort of
Yeah,
a cool.
right. So day 2, He's separating the water. He makes sky. Day 3, lets dry ground appear. So God either created land early and now lets it appear, or He creates it then.
Well, if it was a watery mass before, it seems like maybe the water's been pushed down or whatever, and dry ground is up. Yeah.
So it was there before. I think it's cool with like on day 3, God says it was good.
Yeah.
Right. God is evaluating how His building progress is going, and He has deemed it good. And then He also starts producing vegetation. So we have plants and trees and seeds and fruits. And I love the thing, according to their kinds.
Yeah.
Right. A tree is going to produce a type of fruit,
Yeah.
and that's its job.
And we're going to see that concept of according to its kind show up, not just with the plants, but with the animals. We're going to see it with the flood narrative as well, is that what Noah is going to bring is kinds,
Yep.
not every animal on the planet. And we'll probably see it earlier in chapter 6 as well.
Nice. I also like that God not only provided a start with the plants and the vegetation, but also a way for them to reproduce. So He talks about their seeds, and I think that's pretty cool according to their kinds. And it's just not one kind either, but it's many in there. All right, day 4, the sun, the greater light, the moon, the lesser light. And if day 4, if He created that, then there's always the question, well, didn't day 1 He created light? So
Yeah.
what's the deal there?
Fun fact, again, we look at the Hebrew text, and the word for light in day 1 and the word for lights in day 4 are different words. So a better word, and some commentaries actually do this, in day 4 He created luminaries. It's not the light itself, but the light givers.
Ah, nice.
Right.
Right.
So yeah, there's been light this whole time. Now He's
Condensed it down to a source.
as he's filling the earth, He's condensing it down for the earth is going to get its light from this thing, right?
Yeah.
The rest of the universe doesn't get its light from our sun. There's still light out there, right? But for Earth, now our light is condensed into this one particular star, and all the other stars and stuff are out there too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
God again it's good. Day 5, fish and sea creatures according to their kinds. He talks about swarms, right? So it's not just one set of each. There's a bunch.
Yeah.
Winged birds according to their kinds, and then be fruitful and multiply. The idea is go make more.
Right.
Day 6, living creatures on land according to their kind. Cattle, creeping things, which we're not going to
creepy
question. Them.
crawlies.
Yeah. Wild animals, and it was good.
Yeah.
Then God made humankind in His image and likeness to rule over creation. So right away, we have a job.
Yeah, and
have a purpose.
part of the image of God includes authority. If we are reflecting God, the humanity was God's representative to the rest of creation. And part of that representation included God's authority to rule over what God had created.
Right. Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. God gives man the seed-bearing plants and fruit from trees as food. So
Yep.
right away, we're vegan.
Yeah.
Right out of
Yeah.
the gate.
Yeah.
I was going to say vegetarian, but
Yeah, vegetarian or
it's
vegan. Yeah. God changes that later, but
Yeah.
it's not us that changed
Right,
that.
day
God
one.
changed it later. We should point out, especially in our modern culture of gender identity and all this stuff. In verse 27, God created humankind in His own image. In the image of God, He created them, male and female. He created them. God created two genders, and both of them are linked to the image and likeness of God. Right? So one is not superior and one is inferior. One is not better than the other or less than the other.
Right.
There are only two that God created, and they're both in His image. So that's a
Thank you.
huge thing that, literally page one,
Right.
that's what I was talking about, sets the foundation for,
Yeah.
everything else.
At the end of day 6, it was very good.
Yeah.
Now, we got to talk about God because it's not stupendous, it's not excellent, it's not wonderful. But God doesn't generally use those words. This is high praise.
Yeah.
It is very good.
Very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everything else has been good so far, but very good brings across this sense of completion, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
exactly.
okay, this is really good.
Yeah, and we're talking 6 literal days of 24-hour periods.
Yeah, which this is the type of thing that sets up then, and we'll get to it next week, when God's like, oh man, there seems to be some regret or grieving, and we'll talk about that, with the flood. How is that? Well, because He's already made a declaration, and now He has to, in a sense, undo that declaration because it's not very good anymore. Right. So,
Chapter 2 starts with day 7. This was the day of the rest and ceasing of work. He completed everything with the heavens and the earth.
Yep.
We get no more information about heavens at this point in time. Certainly in other places we do, but
yeah, it says with all their host, earth with all its host, and heaven with all its host. Well, what's the host of heaven? Well, so you've got the planets and everything, but usually the host of heaven in the Old Testament includes angels. So we know angels were present and watched all this. We know that from other passages. We're not told about their creation, when or how or anything, but I think they are included in the host of heaven as part of the creation week.
Right. So then, like you said, we kind of circle back again, and we get more information. We get more information about water or rain too, and what happened with Adam and Eve too.
Yeah.
Because notice we haven't even talked about Adam and Eve yet, and we already have the earth populated.
So this is a really important thing, is that there are a lot of people who want chapter 1 and chapter 2 to be two completely different creation accounts. When in reality, chapter 1 is your big picture, and then we zoom in on day 6, and chapter 2 says, let me give you more detail about that. We're not talking about two separate things here, right? This concept of rain, again, will come up with the flood. It doesn't say that it never rained before the flood. It said that it never rained before God created humans,
Right.
to cultivate the land.
Right.
After
So-
that, it doesn't tell us anything
Yeah, so
more.
what it does tell us now is that springs brought water up to the surface versus rain.
Yeah, and it could have rained after this, long before the flood. It just says to this point, for these first 3 days, 6 days, whatever, there was no rain yet. Okay,
No one to cultivate the ground, so God formed a man from dirt, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Right, 2-step process.
Yeah.
there. Always a 2-step process.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right?
Yeah. God plants the orchard. We know it more as Eden. Plants it in the east. Adam was placed there. He actually gets named later, and we'll just talk about that later then.
Okay.
God planted a bunch of trees, and also the tree of life and the tree of knowledge are named in there. A little foreshadowing about what's going to happen.
Yeah, so what's interesting is sometimes we get this idea that, Adam and Eve lived in the garden and they were supposed to stay in the garden, and, God kicked them out of the garden, like we see. But the garden is where they met with God. The orchard is where they met with God. That was a sacred place, right? A religious or a spiritual place. God commanded them to multiply and fill the earth. They were not limited to that place. They could have gone anywhere on earth and they would have been fine. That was where they were to keep coming back to meet with God specifically. Right? That's why that place was so important. That's why when they were kicked out, they were banished. It wasn't that they were banished from their home. It's that they were banished from the presence of God. Right?
Yeah, breaking with God.
Yeah, so it's like, God said fill up the whole earth. Well, they're not going to fill up the whole earth and stay in their little orchard, right?
Yeah.
So
So the big question is, where was Eden, right? And we're going to play a little Indiana Jones here, because we are given the name of 4 rivers. So can't we just follow these rivers? And
you really can't.
Yeah.
because we have so little information about the geography of the earth before the flood, and we know there was a huge topographical, the flood really did damage to the earth, right? So they come along and they're like, okay, this is what we called that river before. We're just going to keep the same name. Don't know if it was the same river, you know,
Right.
type thing. But Eden was the region. And, east of what? It didn't say east of what. But Moses is writing this, like you said, thousands of years after the fact. He never saw what it looked like before.
Right.
So he's just like, okay, over in the east, there was a garden. Yeah, okay, Right, yeah, there's no way for us to tell where it was. Yeah.
So Adam's now in the garden. And God gives him a rule. You can eat anything you want, but do not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will surely die.
Yeah. One law, one rule.
Yeah. Maybe it took him a couple days. God recognized that it wasn't good for Adam to be alone, so he made animals, and he had Adam name him.
Yeah.
And it seems like somewhere in here, God starts calling him Adam, where before maybe he didn't. So what's his name and how did he get it?
Yeah, the thing is, the Hebrew word Adam just means man, right? And it's a similar word to ground, Adamah. Just put an AH at the end is ground.
Okay.
So, I mean, literally, it's just like the dirt man. I mean, really. So his name, much like probably how he named the animals based on their characteristics, his name just came from his characteristics, right? Eve is the same way. The Hebrew word is chava, and it means living. And he calls her, I'm going to call you the living one because you're the mother of all the living ones. I mean, it's just how how that worked. I will point out here what's interesting though is you said God actually not just noticed that Adam was lonely, but actually created the situation for Adam to become lonely.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So all these animals came by. Adam had to name them, and he recognized that there was pairs, and he's like,
something. Yeah.
I'm missing something.
Yeah. He had a good relationship with God. He had a good relationship with creation, but it wasn't quite enough, and he sensed this loneliness, which tells us that loneliness or the feeling of loneliness is not sin. It's not good. It's not the best. It's not what God wants for us, but it's not sin because God brought Adam to that place so that God could fix it.
Right.
Which I think is really cool.
Right. So Eve was made by God, using a piece of Adam in there. And then in chapter 3, we get into the temptation and the fall.
Yeah.
So in this chapter, we see sin entering the world. So always a big question is, did this take 1,000,000 years? Literally, how long do you think this took?
I think it was probably, it was less than a month, I would guess. Eve did not get pregnant before this. The very next chapter, she got pregnant apparently right away or very quickly.
Right.
So I'm thinking that this did not take very long at all. Maybe a couple of weeks. Some people shorten it even as short as a couple of days.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the serpent here is Satan himself.
Right.
I think that the Satan is called the ancient serpent in Revelation. He's called a dragon. I think this was his natural form. And serpentine, it doesn't say, even the Hebrew text doesn't say it was a snake, the way we usually think of it. Is a serpentine form. And he's already rebelled against God, and he's trying to get man to do the same thing.
Yeah, so take time when reading chapter 3 because it does take a little discernment in there on what's going on. But the key point is Eve did give Adam the apple to eat, but Adam was there the whole time.
Yeah.
And he watched her do it, and he did not do anything, so he
Yeah.
was definitely passive. And then there's also the question, where did Eve get her information from?
Yeah.
We see where God told Adam, don't eat from this tree. And now we find in this chapter the serpent questioning Eve.
Not Adam.
And lying to her.
Yeah.
And Eve giving a response back that wasn't quite valid.
Yeah.
It was close, but it wasn't quite valid. So did Adam tell her wrongly? Because God maybe told her the information and he wouldn't have told her wrongly.
Yeah.
Or did Eve make something up in there?
Yeah, all of that is speculation. I think part of the authority, the image of God, we do see headship. Adam was the head over his wife. He named his wife like he named animals, right? So there is a headship. Again, it's not inferior, superior. But there is a hierarchy of authority, right? So God intentionally told Adam the instructions before he gave him a family. It was Adam's job to lead his family, right? So did he already start in chapter 2 by not leading his family well, which unfolded into chapter 3?
Well, it seems like it.
Seems like it.
That's the obvious one. So they eat, they put on fig leaves like we see.
Yeah.
And then God comes and is like, hey, did you eat from the tree? he knew, right?
Well,
It was still a question, giving them a chance to say. And he asked Adam, right, as the head of the family, and Adam threw his wife under the bus.
Absolutely. And God, too. The woman that you gave me, right?
Yeah.
I was
It can't be
fine.
my
I
fault.
was fine before you gave me this woman, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, all sorts.
Yeah, but we need to remember he was there.
Yeah,
you know,
he was there the whole time, and you pointed that out.
And he knew the rules,
He
yeah.
listened to the conversation, and he should have said, no,
Yep.
God said this, we're not going to do it. You know, get behind me, Satan, you know, type
Right.
thing, whatever.
Yep.
And he did.
But he went along with it.
Yep.
Yeah. So then God asked the woman, and the woman says, "Yep, serpent tricked me, and I ate it."
Yep.
So God hands out punishment, and like you said, the main punishment was a separation from God.
Yeah.
Which part of which was you're no longer allowed in my special spot.
Yeah,
in Eden.
there's new hostility between husband and wife now. There's hostility between humans and creation now. I mean, it's just
So that one is huge.
Yeah.
And the rest of the Bible, it deals with it,
Yeah.
right? The creation groans
Yeah.
under the curse.
Yeah.
And this is the curse.
This is the curse right here that, Romans 8 says that creation was placed under it unwillingly. It wasn't creation's fault, it was man's fault. In the millennial kingdom, when Jesus is actually here on earth ruling, reigning as king, that curse will finally be lifted and we will be back to where we should have been with creation this whole time.
Yeah. God makes garments from skins and clothes them and kicks them out of Eden.
Yeah.
So they couldn't eat from the tree of life. You know,
Yeah.
he also has a reason in there
Yep.
too.
Yeah, the tree of life will show back up in eternity, and it represents, like I was talking about, it represents a relationship with God, right? It's not like, they had to eat this fruit in order to stay alive, because death didn't exist before sin, so it couldn't be that. But there's this. It's symbolic, but it's this relationship with God. Food is always a fellowship type thing, eating and drinking together, right?
Yep.
So here's a way to eat and drink with God. I'm not sure exactly how that looks, right? But it shows up here, and it shows up, the first couple of chapters, and it shows up in the last couple of chapters, right? When everything is made new
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, it comes back. Right.
Yeah.
Nice. Some centuries were put in front of Eden, so they couldn't get in.
Yeah.
So a couple angels had
Yeah.
a job.
Yeah, cherubim
Pretty
with
cool job.
lightsabers, I
Yeah,
think.
Exactly. Twirling things around.
Which is interesting, by the way, because Satan was a cherub, right? So he was supposed to probably help man have access to God, and instead, the cherubim are supposed to help man have access to God, and instead, because of man's sin, they still kept their job as protectors of God's holiness, but now it excluded man because now we're on the outside instead of on the inside.
Oh, right.
Right? So.
Right. Chapter 4, Adam and Eve became intimate, and Cain was born.
Yep.
So the first son, he was a farmer. Abel was born, soon after.
Probably. Yep.
He was a shepherd.
Yeah, and I don't think, obviously there's, probably 9 months or a year or so between them, right? But I don't think it took very long after, they were expelled from that garden that this all took place, which is, again, I think their sin happened fairly quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
This chapter also has, at a designated time, Cain and Abel brought an offering to God.
Yeah.
So that says to me there's a lot of background that we don't get.
We have no idea.
Right.
Yeah.
So at a designated time, who made the time? Was that Adam, Cain, and Abel? Was God coming down and saying, "Hey, here's what I need you to do"?
Yeah. And what's interesting is it doesn't say it was a sacrifice; it says it was an offering, right? People think, Cain's was bad because it was vegetables. Abel's was good because it was blood and sheep. And that's reading into the text. Nothing ever says that here. What it does say is that Cain's heart was bad.
Right.
Now, 1 John does say that his works were evil, but works are tied to heart a lot. So his heart was bad. I don't think his heart was right with God. I don't personally, and I'm not willing to die on this hill. I don't personally think that it was a problem that he brought from his produce. Right? He's a farmer. He brought what he had.
Right.
I
I
think
always thought it
hard.
wasn't some of the first grown or the first fruits.
Could be.
Whereas Abel's was, the firstborn, even the fattest, it said.
Yep.
And Cain, I'm keeping this,
And
that one looks good.
Right, and that could be, and that still comes back to the heart
Yeah,
issue,
exactly.
right? He's not giving God from the first. It just says he brought some of what he had, whereas Abel brought the best, or
Yeah,
something.
and you're right. So then later God says, if you do what is right, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Cain, this isn't the end of the world. Cain, of course, got angry.
Blew it out of proportion.
And God knew, and God even says sin is crouching at your door.
Yeah.
But you got to take care of it.
Yeah.
Well, so instead, Cain and Abel go into a field, and Cain kills Abel.
Yeah.
Slews Abel.
Yeah.
So we have the first murder.
The word there is really brutal too. It's not like he just knocked
right.
him over the head. I mean, this was it's almost as if Cain was saying, "You want a sacrifice? I'll give you one." I mean, there's this whole pent up rage type thing that's sort of coming out. It spills over, and he slaughtered Abel. Is what he did. This was a big deal.
So God asks where he's at, and he, of course, flippantly answers, "What, am I my brother's keeper?
Yeah.
Is it my job to keep track of him?"
Yeah.
And then God says, "Your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground, from the stones."
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is that, I mean, it's like blood is
Yeah.
everywhere. It's not just that, he shot him and there's this little trickle or whatever type thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so Cain now gets banished.
Yep.
And farming is going to be harder for him, so he says he's going to become a homeless wanderer. And Cain says, "Oh, that's too much. Somebody's going to find me and kill me."
Yeah.
So then the question is, who's
Where
the
the
someone?
somebodies? Yeah.
Where'd the people come from?
Yeah, well, so what we find out, we zip down to the end of, or in the beginning of the next chapter, is that Adam had a son named Seth who came in sort of like a replacement. You don't replace children, but as a replacement for Abel, right? Well, Adam was 130 years old when Seth was born, okay? So that means that Cain and Abel, assuming that they were born very quickly after Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, are probably in their late 120s at this point. We know from chapter 5 that Adam and Eve had many other sons and daughters, right? 120 plus years is a lot of time to have lots of children.
Right. And for those children to have children.
And for children to have children. So, where did Cain get his wife and all this stuff? Sister, niece, whatever. There's not a problem here. Perfect genetics. There's no genetic mutation. God never said anything was wrong with it. They were supposed to have children, multiply, and fill the earth. That's exactly what he did. So he's got brothers and sisters and nephews and nieces and, all of this stuff that, this is the first murder. This is the first, you took the life of our brother, our uncle type thing. Yeah, there's going to be some revenge that's going to be, they're going to want to do.
Yeah. So God puts a mark on Cain so he can't be killed. Cain goes out of the presence of God and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden.
Yeah, by the way, that also means, I was going to say, sometimes we think of, Cain and Abel as, kids or teenagers or whatever.
Yeah.
They're not kids and teenagers, right?
Right,
120 years old or 125 years old or whatever. Yeah.
So then we really see the start of a civilization. We see Cain and his wife marry, many of their offspring. There's a list of names in there. Methuselah lived 969 years.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some people living some long lives here. There's also seems to be some discoveries. One guy figured out to heat metal, and he could make tools of bronze and iron. Somebody else is making flutes and other
musical
kind of
instruments.
Yeah.
Yep.
Adam and Eve gave birth to Seth. Seth had a son. And then at that time, people began to worship the Lord.
Yeah.
Again, that's it. That's the whole context right there.
Yeah, we don't have exactly what that looks like. We don't know if it's just a small group. We don't know if that means that there's a certain religious center that was started, anything.
Yep. Chapter 5, we find the lineage from Adam and Eve all the way down to Noah. That's cool.
Yeah, so there's 10 names listed, 10 generations listed.
And again, it's not everybody.
Yeah, it's certainly not everybody, but it's following a very particular line down that keeps branching off, over, and it's just very, very short. A lot of people argue, well, there's missing generations and stuff. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there are missing generations, because when Adam was 130 years old, Seth was born. It doesn't matter if Seth is his son or his great-grandson. Adam was 130 when Seth was born. So you can literally add up these numbers. Generations don't matter. You can add up the numbers and say,
the number of years.
Yeah, the actual number of years is just math.
Right.
Right. You don't have to worry about the generations. So.
Right. I would say, take your time reading about the people. Like you said, you can actually plot a timeline.
Yeah.
And the guy who lived the 900 year, almost 1,000 years, he knew Adam. He knew, he knew Noah.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. He was Noah's, grandfather. So it's really, so basically, assuming these numbers are, and I mean, so how old am I? Right now, I'm 49 years old. Okay. Well, hold on a second. But I turned 50 this year. So in 2025, which is when we're recording this, right? Am I 49 or 50?
Yes.
Right. So that's the thing. So to each one of these, you have a margin of error, but it's only a couple of years, right? All of this whole thing from the creation of Adam, until Noah, you're talking less than 1,700 years. But there's 1,700 years in this chapter. You know, as you fight, you know, find
Right. So
the timeline.
we're talking all of these years are what we would consider literal
Oh yeah,
years in
absolutely.
here.
Literal Earth years. Yeah, because we have day and we have evening and morning. We have days. We have weeks in the first couple of chapters, and now we have years. There's nothing in the text that says we should be looking at these symbolically, or you know, it's a scale.
It's
you know,
months
1 year
instead
equals
of-
this.
yeah,
You know,
right,
what a year is a year is a year.
Yeah.
So
we end this chapter with this young man by the name of Noah,
Mm-hmm.
who will be building an ark, but he just happens to be 500 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and he's now the father of 3.
yeah, yep, yeah, 5,500. Yeah, it's all the same
Yeah,
thing, right?
right.
Yeah.
So we got through the first 5 chapters.
Yeah, 1,700 years and 20 some minutes, and
Yeah, and that's why we couldn't reduce it more.
might have left a few details out. Hopefully, if you've read this before, maybe 1,000 times before, you're it's easy to say, oh yeah, I know this story. Slow down, take your time, read through it, look for some of these things that maybe you haven't seen before, maybe you haven't even heard before. You're like, hold on a second, I've never heard that.
Right.
Good. Email us, put it in a comment, say, hold on, could you, go over this a
Elaborate
little bit
on
more?
this.
Yeah, and actually take your time and enjoy. These are the first pages of the book, and what we do here has an impact on everything else we believe. So, like and subscribe and share and do all the things that you do on social media with this, and we'll come back next time and we'll pick up right here in chapter 6.
Keep going with Noah.
Keep going.